is Siobhan McGrath and I'm the engagement producer at Artsadmin. I am a white woman with dark hair and I'm wearing a floral shirt, and I'm currently in South London, where I'm from. I'm here with a group of fantastic artists who are all working on a project with myself called Arty Parties. Arty Parties is a collaboration with Canon Barnett Primary School. This is a primary school that is right next door to Artsadmin's home in East London, Toynbee Studios. It's an ambitious project. We are due to work with almost all the children in the school over one academic year. And at the moment, we can't be there because of the government restrictions, which is a shame, but we are gathering today to have a conversation about it, to reflect a little bit on the processes and the practice, and to think ahead of a time when we will be able to get back in the school gates. I should say that this project is part of Artsadmin's work within the network Create to Connect, Create to Impact, and that we are funded very kindly by Creative Europe for this project. That seems a good time for me to invite the other people on the call to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Tarik Elmoutawakil. I am a mixed race man, North African and European mixed, with a short moustache and a receding hairline. Why not include that? I'm wearing a sort of turquoise sports top. My art practices are focused around curation, combined arts, access, inclusion, and joy.
I'm Rudy Loewe. I'm a visual artist and artist educator. I am a Black person with 2 long braids and glasses, and I'm wearing a wax print shirt. My practice is mostly focused on drawing and painting, printmaking, and thinking about different kinds of Black histories or different kinds of social dynamics. I'm working with education as well. This is something that kind of comes into that part of my practice as well, how to get people to think about different kinds of social dynamics and histories, and kind of engaging with our own histories.
Hello, my name's Ella. Go by the name of Ella the Great. I'm dual heritage. I'm wearing a black top with a wonderful crocheted, very pleased I found, vest and a matching bow which goes with my black top. I am a visual storyteller, clown. I work with theatre, cabaret and children's parties and workshops in schools. I like to create spaces with collaboration and play at the centre.
Hi, my name's Jacob V. Joyce. I am a mixed race, Black and Irish, light-skinned person with 2 big earrings and nose rings, a purple little hat, an African batik fabric, and I'm here in Peckham. My artwork uses science fiction to provide opportunities for people of all ages to reimagine the past and reimagine the future. And some of the mediums that I use for that are creative writing, mural painting, map making, music, and soundscapes. Yeah, and illustration as well.
At the time of this conversation, we should be in school spending time with all the brilliant children there. So it's a real shame that we're not there at this time, but I thought it'd be a good place to start if Tarik, as the lead artist on this project, very fancy, would want to talk a little bit about the themes of the project and how we've come to this point in time.
So the project itself is one that is about world building and seeing the world through new or different lights. Being children involved will be encouraged to be agents of change, taking influence from ancestry, from history, personal history and global history, and also the possibility or possibilities of the future. And the idea is that the classes are taken on a journey through the sessions, exploring the idea of radically refashioning their environments, then populating that environment with alternative versions of themselves, or super versions of themselves, or whatever they want to imagine, followed by a filling of the space with dynamically created bright UV art and costume, before finally tying all of this world building together for an intergenerational dance party. So that's what the project, that's my idea of what the project would look like. And the inspiration for it in the first place, I think, was when I saw the proposal of doing an art project with kids in school. I thought back to, I guess, my development into adulthood, from childhood into adulthood, and thinking about the parts of myself that maybe I'd left behind, or had, through my own experience of being an intersectionally marginalized person, queer, disabled, person of color. I recognized that there are parts of myself, my Islamic heritage, for example, that I kind of rejected, so I could get closer to my queer self, and it's just various ways in which one part of myself had to make space for another. And I love the idea of doing a project in schools that really gets children to embrace the fullness, the unusualness of themselves, like everybody is different, to really embrace all the different parts of what makes people different, and to celebrate difference, and what that could look like in the school. And I think it was important to me also that happens in collaboration with the adults in their lives, parents or caregivers, who are a huge influence, I think, on the children in their lives. And I wanted them to be part of this journey as well. There's no point in something, I think, happening in school if outside of the school there's a very counter energy. And so it made sense that the parents were part of this journey as well, and that then it's not something that happens without them, that they're not part of this opening up, I guess, or reconnecting with parts of themselves. Because I can see that also parents, a lot of the time I can recognize my own parents as maybe the pressure for them to have to leave parts of their culture behind in order to allow me to have other opportunities in this country. So I wanted to make sure that they also to acknowledge their journeys as well. And I recognized as a child, for example, I really wasn't that interested in my dad's stories about his own childhood. And I felt like that was in part due to, centering whiteness and white narratives and that kind of thing. And I felt like I rejected my dad's culture and heritage up until too late a point in my life. And that wasn't from necessarily my own fully conscious choice at all. I felt like I was going to be encouraged to not really take so much interest in that. So I like this idea that children will be more interested in their lives with their parents and caregivers, and therefore have more pride in themselves growing up as well. That's a little bit about the project.
Thank you so much, Tarik. I wondered, because you said so many beautiful things about the project, whether Ella, Jacob and Rudy wanted to jump in and talk a bit about why they felt attracted to working with us on Arty Parties.
It just really strongly resonated with me, and I feel like it kind of combined a lot of disagrees with my mission here on planet Earth, which is to have play and collaboration and imagination. And I believe that we're much more powerful than we're led to believe. So if we can start that in schools from the very beginning, and then, because that's where lots of ideas start. So to have our presence there is absolutely amazing. And because within my practice of my with the clowning, it's letting people have their own power to be able to, and also to as my role as a clown, when I'm in workshops or parties, is to not be the only authority in the room. The children can be right, they could have a say in what happens around them.
Yeah, I'm really so a lot of the work that I do with young people happens outside of schools, with galleries, or sometimes in the past when I've been doing big outdoor community projects and I've connected to schools and said, can you tell parents to bring their kids to this event? Because I traditionally have found that schools can be well, you know, they're spaces of discipline and of rules, and you know, and of policy and of management, and I think within that, you know, often children, often different types of creativity and different types of learning are kind of pushed to the side because they're inconvenient, because the most convenient, there's an idea of what's not a normative way of learning, normative way of behaving, and those ways are kind of like given priority, and lots of young people kind of who don't learn in that way are kind of seen as bad people with bad behavior, people with behavioral issues, and are kind of seen as like a problem children. And I've experienced that firsthand from teachers who've told me about problem classes or problem children in schools. So I try to do a lot of work outside of schools because I don't want to be I don't want the children's learning to be governed by pre-existing assumptions about what that child is capable of. But saying that, I am also really interested. I don't think it's a black and white issue where we just have to not work in schools. I think that I'm really interested in this idea of a party in a school, because I think that, you know, as we go into adulthood, as we become, as people leave school and they become, you know, have a more autonomy and agency over their own lives, and they go in space, they're still going to be policed, whether you're in a club, whether you're in a gallery, whether you're on a plane, whether you're anywhere. There are always going to be rules, you know, even if you're doing a big piece of public artwork outside, there's still ways in which you need to, like, I think it's interesting to see, like, how much of a party can you have in a school? Like, where is the kind of elasticity within that? Whereas I think in this points of contradiction is where we can learn a lot. So I'm kind of interested to see, like, although I'm like, my experience and my voice is like, party in a school, that's not going to work. Like, you know, how is it a party if the teacher's like, all right, party's done, everyone put your things away? But actually that does happening even if you're in a club, there would be a time when the people say, okay, the club is closing now, everybody get out of the club. Or I think that I'm resisting the normative kind of assumptions that I have about schools, and being like, okay, let me put that aside and see actually how much can we allow for disruption and intervention. And I think that, you know, it takes leaps of faith on both sides, from artists who work with young people and from schools, to kind of like see what the contrasting energies or approaches that we have can kind of bring about.
Thank you, Jacob. Everything you've just said just resonates so strongly with all the conversations we've had so far about Arty Parties. And I think, just if I can say for a moment, that Canon Barnett is a school that we've worked with quite regularly over the last 3.5 years, but have also worked with in the past with Artsadmin's history, like 10 years ago. So I think our relationship of building that trust over time allows them to take these risks, which I don't think, you know, risks is a very strong word, but I'm very excited to see how we can create a political space of a party within an institution, for sure. Rudy, did you want to say anything or add anything to that brilliant point, or did you want to say anything about why you fancied doing the project with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's about making space for joy. That I think, kind of to echo some of the things that have already been said, I feel like all children should have the chance to have joy and creative joy, and engage with artistic practice in a way that brings them joy, and harnesses their imagination and their, you know, sense of play. And when you look at a borough like Tower Hamlets, you know, kind of the kind of economic disparity does show that there are kids who come from very wealthy backgrounds there, and there are kids who come from very low income backgrounds as well. And so it means also that, you know, there is going to be a bit of a gap in terms of kids who have a lot of access to art and creativity, and kids who maybe their family just can't make that a priority. And so I think it is really important for us as artists to find ways to kind of re-inject that, and kind of like Jacob was saying about school is not always an environment where you know, the focus is not joy. Like, it's a bit ironic really, because, you know, learning should be full of joy, but it often isn't, you know, because of the different structures that schools and teachers have to abide by, then that can't always be a priority for them. But I feel like as artists, that's kind of one of the great things that we have, that we don't have to stick to the curriculum, and we don't have to have all these structures necessarily. So it feels like much more possible to focus on something like joy, and bring that sense to them. You know, and I really think that it is important that from a young age, kids learn that art is fun, you know, that is one of the primary aspects of it for them, that it's not something like, oh God, now we have to do this, you know, that it should be an outlet for them.
Tarik, I wondered if I could bring you in to talk a bit about the fact that our ambition is to throw 3 Arty Parties over one academic year, working with almost all the children in the school, years 1 to 6, and, you know, really curating and collaborating with the children to make these parties. We've been lucky enough to spend a bit of time in school already. In the lead up to this project, we called it our research and development phase, because, you know, everything in the arts has to have a very fancy name, but really it was just getting to hang out, right? Can you talk a bit about what it's been like getting to know the children at Canon Barnett, and the staff as well, if you'd like to talk about them?
I'd love to, actually. It was so nice coming to Canon Barnett School. I was really overwhelmed by actually some of the joy that I felt in the classrooms. And in the playground, and I mean, it's obviously it's a school environment, but I think schools have certainly many schools have changed some of their approaches in the last 10, 20, however many years. I think there can be more focus sometimes on the sort of democratic classroom type environment, or the different approaches to teaching styles and understanding of individual differences in children. So yeah, it was really nice to arrive at the school and have such welcome curiosity from the children. I really was surprised about that. Maybe not only surprised because I think I'm used to going into other institutional spaces, perhaps more directed towards adults, where I, as a queer, visibly queer at times, brown body, going into spaces, you know, feel some rejection or not, you know, non-welcomeness. Obviously, one thing I noticed in the school anyway was that it's 90% people of colour in the school.
Yeah, I think it's even more than that, but you're about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that in itself was something quite interesting, to go into a school where most of the kids are brown, and had one kid, when I went into one of the classrooms, turned around and said "Assalamu alaikum" when they saw me. I really loved it. I wasn't wearing anything that suggested that I had Muslim heritage, but they saw that in me, and they shared it with me, and it brought some real joy to me. I was wearing nail varnish at the time, when I'm not wearing any now, but I was wearing some at the time when I went into the school. And I do remember I'd just come back from somewhere where I'd been abroad, and I had my nails done while I was away, and they were done with shellac, so they were on quite strongly. And I had a moment the day before coming to the school when I was a little bit nervous, actually. Suddenly had this fear of, what will it be like if some of the kids, I don't know, there's maybe some kids who are maybe not used to gender queerness, perhaps, and they see someone who maybe they see presents as a man but also is wearing nail varnish. What's this sort of thing? So I was a little bit nervous. Will there be some kids that don't like it? Will there be some parents who see me and are like, why are you bringing in this person into the school? I was worried that might be the case, and I think that kind of those fears, they came from a real place, because I maybe have some experience of that kind of feelings in the past. And I know maybe also schools, for a lot of LGBT people, you know, we learn to hide a lot of our queerness in school, I think. So the idea of going back into school and being a visibly queer person, I think, could be a little bit of a triggering feeling, perhaps, or it could be maybe make somebody a bit nervous. Anyway, my point being is that when I went into the school, it was so wonderful to have these kids have such fascination and like joyous interest in my brightly coloured nails. The kids wanted to ask me questions about them. There was one boy who just kept looking. He was sitting. He was trying to focus on the teacher, but he couldn't, and he kept looking behind to look at my nails. And I think actually, I'm pretty sure this kid was a kid who had been raised. He was raised Muslim, and as someone who also was raised Muslim, I didn't experience seeing any. I didn't see any I didn't see any queerness really growing up that I remember. Certainly, there was no visible queerness that came into my classroom and sat in the room with me. And there was, I don't know, it was just amazing seeing these kids. I don't know, like something had kind of like been lifted for this kid. It's going to be like, what's this in the room? It's sitting here with me. So there was something that I really appreciated about that. But I also noticed in the playground is at some point, a group of boys in year 6, hovering around. I was having a conversation with a few of the kids in the lower years. They were asking me questions, telling me that I was older than their parents and stuff like that. How old are you? I'm 38. You're older than my mum. Okay. Thanks for that. That happened quite a few times. And then so there were some boys who were hanging around. And I could see they wanted to talk. So I was like, hey, what's up? And then how did they say? I think they said to me like, "What's that on your nails?" And I said, they didn't. Yeah, they were like, "What's that on your nails?" I said, "It's nail varnish." And they kind of, I can't remember how it was, but they didn't. I could tell they wanted to have a conversation about it, but they didn't want to like show an interest in it. That's what I was feeling anyway. And so it was an interesting thing to navigate. The way that I did it was I showed them my nails and I said, they're all different colours. Which is your favourite colour? And then I think one of them was like, how did they say? I think something like, I'm a boy, so I don't like. How did we do it? Siobhan, do you remember how this conversation went? Maybe
I do. I loved it so much. I was there watching the whole time, like, yeah, just beaming. But I think Tarik was so smart in that moment to include and to bring down, like, try and like deflate the fear. It was really to see like the boys really wanting, not allowing themselves to just get involved with something they obviously were really curious about. But I think it was you said what's your favorite nail, and they're like, oh, we can't talk about that, we're boys. And you're like, well, what's your favorite color? And they said, oh, well, black. And you went,
so this is your favorite nail.
This will be your favorite nail then, wouldn't it? And it was a beautiful moment of joy for me, for sure.
Yeah, it was interesting. What I also felt from that moment was that the kids in the years 3, 4, and 5 in the primary school, that's the first 3 years, there was much more innocent curiosity, I guess. And I felt that in year 6, the year before you go into secondary school, the boys were starting to have to learn to reject anything that might be girlish or gendered in a way that was not their boy gender. And I could see that starting to happen. I could see that they were finding ways in which to say, we like this, and we're not allowed to like this, and we don't like that. And yeah, I guess that gave me extra reason to think this is an important project, because there's a lot of, you can see almost a transgression from like, oh, this is really wonderful, play with any people, boys and girls can do anything. And then actually as we're heading to secondary school, that we start to leave some of those ideas behind. And I really wanted to instill at an early age that some joy in holding on to the playfulness that we can have with gender and queerness and all the things that make us ourselves.
A sort of freedom in putting on something else on and performing it, or even to have an understanding of things to process. In the circus, we were very fortunate to have. It was just under the entertainment and play and fun was and so you're putting on these things, they're costumes, so you don't have to agree with it. Well, you have to agree with it, but you have to enjoy it, and that was at the center. For sure. And I think something that came to mind is how important it is to, because when I was a little person, looking out to see myself in anything around, like, I don't know, people, other TVs, there was much internet, but yeah, to be able to see yourself in a big person is incredible, and that's really what drew me also to the project, that there's 4 of us, 5 of us, and we're all going to be there. So there's all we can just by our presence is going to be
Can I respond to that?
important.
I think that's a really important part of this project as well, is that I really like this idea that, so the kids in the school are used to having art happening in the school. The kids have had Artsadmin coming in, other artists have come into the space, but I think in the past they may have even had representations of queerness in the school, art and queerness in adulthood. But I don't know if they've had representation of queer, brown, arty people in the space. And I think that's in itself something that's quite, it's not just that the world of arts and culture and whatever is not just the preserve of white people. And so for me, I really love this idea that we are there presented as a group, perhaps a group of friends in the space, that we can see that we don't have to reject other brown people to be part of the world of arts and culture and unusualness and exploration and all that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be, I think we don't often see brown people in groups together in general, because, particularly in alternative scenes or art spaces and that kind of thing. So I think there's something there that I really am excited that we all will be seen together at times as a cohort, and that we don't have to choose one thing for another. It's that again, we can have it all.
I know that everyone has experience of working and making with children. So because that's something that we all take joy in, I wondered if anyone would like to talk a bit about what it means to make work with children and like true collaboration, not just, I suppose, bringing the art to the children, but making with children. Would anyone want to speak a bit on that?
Yeah, so recently I was working with Innova and RSA Academies on their contemporary art project, the CAS project, and so for this project I was working with some year 8 kids in a secondary school in Handsworth in Birmingham, and the kind of the project was to focus on oracy, the idea of oracy, and making an artwork that would then become part of the school curriculum. And for me, it was really important to think about the different histories in Handsworth, and how to get the kids kind of connecting with this, because, most of the kids, they're born there, they've grown up there, but they're not necessarily really aware of recent history in Handsworth. And Handsworth is an area that has, this amazing radical history. Through the project we could say, well, this is your history, and like, how do you feel about it, and what's important to you about your area, and how do you feel about how outsiders represent your area, because it happens a lot in the media, and there's this idea of what Handsworth is like and how they actually experience it. And so one of the elements of the project was that we were going to have this protest in the school. And, I said to the kids, like, have you ever been to a protest before? And they were like, no. And I was like, well, today you're going to go to your first protest. So they made these placards, which were about things that they felt were important in the area. Some of them were like end racism, or about knife crime, or about the environment. And I was like, okay, we're actually going to like go and have this protest. I prepped them by teaching them different chants, and like, one was the rhythm maker, she had the drum going. I was like, all right, your role is really important because everyone else is going to be chanting and you're going to be doing this, so that they could get really involved. And we like went out into the courtyard, and it was just this really beautiful moment, because they were all just like, are we really allowed to do this? And I expected the teachers to be like, oh God, this is a nightmare. But the teachers were like really on board. And it was only the teachers who didn't know what the project was who were like a little bit shocked by what we were doing. But it was just a really nice moment to bring something like that into the school, and just to get them to engage with the histories, and just to use art practice in that way, and kind of what is it that we want to be doing with art as artists when we come into schools, like what is our goal there. Now the artwork that was created from those sessions is installed in the school. And we don't, because of the virus, then we don't know like how long it's going to be there or anything. But originally the idea was that in all areas of the curriculum, the kids would be using that somehow in their work. So how could this relate to history or English or even science, and thinking about embedding the idea of oracy and the local history into all areas of the curriculum.
What you were just describing there so amazingly made me think about a conversation I think me and Jacob had when we spoke last about taking the work outside of the building, and what does that mean to us, and should that happen? And we've thought about Arty Parties and whether these curated parties should leave the school gates, and if so, why is that important, and what does that mean? I wonder if we want to talk a little bit about, because we've touched upon it and I think it's a really important thing to discuss, what are the challenges of bringing the politics of partying into a school environment?
I think there's this idea of seriousness and what's taken seriously and what's important. And in a school environment, in my experience, it's been quite rigid, and people have, especially the teachers, are very strict with what they need to get through. So there's no room for play, and this idea of stop being silly. And I like this idea of silly because, like, in that space of where you're sort of, I think they stop it because it's going to take us off course. But within that space of freedom, which is silliness, that's where real learning happens.
I love clown artists, but people that I've in the past known who've managed to, I don't know, go to Lecoq or whatever the famous clowning schools seem to generally be white privileged people from my experience, and so I'm really excited to have some brown clowning in the space, I guess.
Hey. Yeah, I started clowning as a child. After school lesson was taken by my wonderful mum to a workshop, and then taken it on and continued. And yeah, so between play and adulthood hasn't really stopped. So, and I don't think it should. And yeah.
Is that political? That like being could the idea of like being silly be a political act, do we think?
I would say so. I mean, there's a certain element of clowning which is a bit rebellious. It's seeing where the rules are, where the lines are, and how in a way you can cross them or push them. And I like, and especially when I've turned up in schools, I've kind of disrupted the rigidity straight away by giving them the power. So even with the register, how would you like to answer this register? And they can come up with their own response. And it's been wonderful. But then because when they like sense a bit of freedom, then the chaos erupts. And I love chaos. I think there's and I guess chaos is could be seen as a political when there's no order.
I feel like that's what the schools worry about, though, that it's just going to be chaos if they invite a party in. But kind of like what you're saying, Ella, I feel like play is such an important part of emotional learning that through play, it gives children a safe space to explore certain parts of themselves emotionally, different things that are going on for them. It's been shown that lots of kids, they sing their feelings. And so it's so important to be able to give them these kind of tools where, they can find different ways to express their emotions. Otherwise, we're not fostering their emotional learning.
Yeah, a responsibility for themselves and other people. So if you're constantly telling them this is the way to be, they can't have that confidence for themselves, and that's important.
I think there's something really important about talking about parties as well as a political thing, because I mean we can see this weekend as well. For example, a lot of the time maybe we have this idea about joy being something that is just frivolous or something, and I can see, I don't know, I don't want to be too critical over the weekend, for example. It's been Super Saturday and a lot of people have gone out and been drinking together. And I guess at the same time, I had a really beautiful party at my home that was with a few trusted friends, and it was so beautiful the way in which people held each other. There were moments where people had stuff that they needed to talk about, that they spoke about, and they cried, and they were hugged by, in this group. And just recognizing how party is like, how it can be transformative for a group of people. It's not just this thing where people be like, oh, I'm getting trashed and falling around and now I'm vomiting. That's not for me what a party is about. For me, it's always been about really transformation and change and healing and that kind of thing. So I like this idea of maybe instilling a reason for a party in there, like that party is not just it's not a frivolous thing to do, that there are political or transformational reasons for communities to have those things. I think of maybe parties maybe as a connection to an ancient practice of festivals where communities come together and share.
So I wanted to respond to the thing about, like, I've been thinking a lot about what parties are, and what's actually good about parties, and I think, to quote my housemate who just taught me this word last night, my housemate Chugli, who's also an artist, I think it's this thing of syncopation that's really good about parties. It's that, it's not a time of synchronization, it's a time when things are kind of what you'd expect to happen. It's like, oh, here's a conversation, oh, the conversation is broken because like you've just arrived, and like, oh, now we're gonna dance, oh no, we can't dance because the food's ready, and like, it's like, the thing that's interesting at parties is they're not like, okay, when you finish section B, move on to section D. When you finish section D, you can draw a picture on the back of the sheet. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the opposite of school in a way, because of that syncopation, that kind of like the beat constantly being broken and changed. Siobhan, you asked a question about potential problems or things that we might encounter, and for me, I think identifying what we mean by party or what the potentialities of party is maybe an early hurdle. Because like just then, like in listening parties, like murder mystery game parties, like watching parties, dance parties, dinner parties. There's so many different types of parties to have, and they're all like really valid. So
no, I completely agree, and everything that you're saying, Jacob, makes me think about the links to what Ella's saying and Rudy's saying about actually just play, and true collaboration will be asking those children through play and let's be silly, what are the parties, what brings you joy, what are your different types and forms of joy. So I think the fact that we've got a long time to work on this project will bring us a truer sense of autonomy that the children can feel, and collaboration as a team, and that the children really feel like they are part of the artistic team.
I really like this idea of children and adults being in a place together and having a party together. I think legitimizing partying as a serious thing to do, and that as something, and also I guess about children and adults being able to be together. I think that's really important. I like the idea that maybe some children maybe are taught some games that their parents used to play, or I don't know what other people's experiences were, but I know that when I was a kid, anytime an adult played with me, it was just the best thing ever. When an adult like chooses to actually play with you, it's like, wow, this is happening. And so I'm like, yeah, perhaps, and I know parents are often tired. It's really always hard to get my parents to play with me. Play with me! When they're tired. But so I like this idea that there may be some games and things that are taught that parents used to play with their children or caregivers, that they can share with other kids in the classroom. I think that there could be something really powerful about that, to show that there's been a long lineage. I know also again as a kid, it's really hard to imagine that adults have been children. I find that, and I was a kid too one day, and you're like, yeah, that's not whatever. And I like this idea that maybe that can be maybe more understood things somehow. Maybe it's impossible for kids to understand that until we become old kids. I don't know.
I think a lot of people forget the games that they used to play. I remember asking my mum, like, what games did you play when you were a kid? When I was a kid, and her being like, I don't remember, and saying like, how can you not remember the games that you played when you were a kid? But I think there's also, I think in the same way that gender, like the freedom of expression of gender gets collapsed, gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you get older.
Sometimes as well, though, it's like giving people a chance to have the play that they never got to have as kids. Like, you know, if you come from a big family and sometimes the older kids actually end up being caregivers for the younger kids and don't get a chance to be kids in the same way that some other kids might get to be, that they don't get to have that sense of play, and actually making a space also for parents that they can engage through their children, so they don't have to necessarily think, oh, this is silly, why am I doing this? Because it's like a way to also bond with their children, but at the same time, you know, giving them this space to be playful themselves and kind of taking care of their own like little inner child that probably like didn't get that space. So this is something that I've witnessed also because I used to work in Tower Hamlets for like 3 years in one of the libraries, and sometimes I would meet parents who, you know, even trying to get them to sing nursery rhymes with their kids, they'd be at first like no, and you know, sometimes when you work more with them and it's like, actually, you know, this is good for your kid and it's like it's also good for you, you know, and it's a good, yeah, it's just like a good way to bond with your kids. So I think, yeah, having the parents present is also like a really great element of the project, that you are incorporating them in the school, also because it's like, so often parents, you know, they drop their kids off at school, they leave, they come back and pick them up, and maybe don't have that much space to like participate in the school day-to-day life, and, you know, making more spaces for the parents to be part of what happens at school, I think is important.
I agree. I think it's really important. I've been in environments where children's festivals, family festivals, and even children's parties, and part of my, I like to bring the parents in just gently, so, and then it's funny, it's nice how the environment, the sort of energy changes, and then the children teach the adults something that they've learnt, or to bring them in, and then it just brings this whole sort of unified sort of feeling that we're all, there's no like observers, everybody's involved in the same thing. Yeah, it's wonderful.
The opportunity for parents to be able to be silly, I think, is a really, really beautiful thing. So much of the time, parents also have to be authorities for their children, and they have to just always be authority, right? And, you know, this is, I'm right, and this is wrong, whatever. And I think to give the parents an opportunity to do some clowning or something, to be wrong about something, to look silly, to do things that that children wouldn't normally see, I think is a really great way for kids to bond with their parents. So yeah, I feel quite strongly about this being an intergenerational project, in ways that we can make it. I also, I guess, want to acknowledge that it might, that, for example, I would ask maybe if I asked my dad what games he would play when he was a kid, and he might say, we didn't really play games, and I might not believe that. But he was a shepherd from the age of 5, apparently. I say apparently because he doesn't know when his actual birthday was, so he assumes at around the age of 5. So maybe he didn't really play games. Maybe that is just a thing that was not afforded to him. I like the idea that he maybe had some fun somewhere, but actually maybe knowing him, maybe he didn't. I could, you know, he could be good at having fun, but yeah, so maybe there's also some trauma around connecting with games and fun and that kind of stuff. So light ways in which to bring people into having that. I think there's something, yeah, about doing that. And I also acknowledge that perhaps that with immigration, for people who are from the global south, perhaps there's more pressure to be working, you know, you've made a big step to leave your family, perhaps to go to another country to bring kids up. So there's more pressure that the decision to do that thing that you decided to do is worth it, you know. And so I think maybe it's extra focus on work and responsibility. Again, taking my own personal experience, and again, I know my dad was very much all about work, and the only ways that I can never really legitimize, often for me to legitimize things, I have to find, I mean, I've made art into my work, so it's legitimate. You know, when I bought myself a laptop, it's because it was a work investment. So So yeah, so encouraging adults to have space in which it's not all about, where there is opportunity for them to play in ways they haven't had before, I think is a really beautiful thing that will have a knock-on effect on the children.
Thank you, Ron. I love that we're all really excited about making these parties intergenerational and inclusive spaces that feel like they'll just be, not the word, they'll be spaces full of joy and community, and that we really want. The Canon Barnett School is such a community anyway, with the parents and the staff, so we want all people that are part of the school to be in that space. That's really exciting. We're sort of coming to the end of like the questions that I had. I wondered before we wrap up if there's just so much to say and so much joy in the conversation. I wondered if there was any things that you wanted to touch on that we haven't already, or if you indeed had questions for each other.
I would just like to say a massive thank you to everybody for attending today, to Jacob and Ella and Rudy. I'm really excited about this project. I think it's going to be so beautiful and have impact on the kids. So what I'm really excited about, I guess, also is that we're thinking about the impact on the kids rather than it just being about, it's not about us and our arts necessarily, you know, it's about what's going to be beneficial to the children. So thank you so much. I'm excited that we're still going to, even in this time, weird ass time, that's what I like to call it, weird ass time, what we can, we're still figuring out how we can make things happen. So thank you, and thank you to Siobhan as well. I'm really grateful that you chose this project.
Yeah, I echo what Tarik said. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Ella. And thank you, Tarik, for being involved and for having this conversation today. It's lifted our spirits, I hope, for the next phase of the project. And just to say, while we're on the call, thank you to Canon Barnett School and all the staff and all the children who welcome us so openly and are willing to play with us and be silly with us.